I'm Joseph Lowry, and for more than a half century I've been involved in the struggle for equality and human rights here in the United States and abroad. You already know the contributions of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, which led to historic social change in this country. But in most cases, progress was achieved by lesser-known heroes and sheroes you may never heard of. Before Rosa and Martin, a series of events swept across the rigidly segregated South, setting the stage for change in the 50s and 60s. Atlanta was one of those places where Jim Crow was boss, a boss with his foot on the neck of black people. Some tolerated it, some tried to work around it, and some, like the Holmes family, fought it with every breath they drew.
It didn't strike me as being really unusual that one would assert one's authority, one's rights, one's privileges, or what one thought one was entitled to. So, yeah, I guess we were a civil rights family. I just didn't think of it in those terms.
And I know traditionally we think of, founding father when we talk about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, but I'm talking about people who challenged the system and said that it was going to work for everybody or it was not going to work for anybody.
Granddaddy believed in, doing what you had to do and to fear no man, do what's right. And so his kids were trained early, to stand up and have fire, and all of them did. And then I guess there's one or two at every family that would be a little more outspoken or would have the kind of leadership to step out. And Tup was like that. He was just a natural-born leader. And once again, he didn't have any fear. I know he always had Granddaddy, I guess, to back him up, being a medical doctor and so forth. But I can never remember a time where we would take a back seat, so to speak, to anybody.
I never thought of it as being a part of the civil rights movement for some reason. I never thought of it that way. All I thought of was my boy going down to the University of Georgia to desegregate a school. We were not prepared for hate letters, hate telephone calls, people, driving by the house and throwing things at the house that we just were not prepared for.
The atmosphere, there was definite hostility there. Most of my classes, I had very little contact with students because the students who probably wanted to befriend me were afraid.
It was just something that they had done, and it was a part of our history, but just wasn't told to us as we were growing up. It was just, this is your grandfather and this is what he did.
Dr. Holmes was a pioneer in many ways, not only at the University of Georgia, but also the first African-American medical student at the Emory School of Medicine. I believe he was the first African-American orthopedic resident, probably resident in general, in that medical system.
During the early 60s, Hamilton Holmes followed a course which had been set more than a generation before his birth. To many people, Hamilton Holmes will always be known as one of the first black students to successfully enroll in the University of Georgia and the first to break the color barrier at Emory University's School of Medicine. But he was a son and grandson of ordinary people who established a tradition of making extraordinary choices during turbulent times. He was predestined to carve a place for himself in the continuing struggle for equality and civil rights in the state of Georgia. Hamilton Earl Holmes was born July 8, 1941, in Atlanta, Georgia's Dwell Infirmary. He was the first child of Isabella and Alfred Tup Holmes, who were part of a burgeoning black middle-class community in the dominant city in the then segregated American South. He came into a world where a black child like himself could be insulated somewhat from the harsh realities of the racism that defined life for people of color.
I think there was a very well-established middle class which demanded certain rights and amenities, and there was what I call the AU factor. I mean, there were all the schools there and the students. We were insulated from the day-to-day conflicts between whites and blacks at that time. We had our own amusements. We had our own professionals. We had our own places to eat out, not a lot, but a few. We did not have to interact with people who hated us visibly day to day.
That hatred was a daily fact of life, often manifested by a relentless campaign of terrorism against blacks who challenged the Jim Crow laws and traditions of the time. A native of Tuskegee, Alabama, the then Isabella Campfield vividly recalls marauding night riders, angered by her father's efforts to get black doctors assigned to the local veterans hospital.
But, I was a very small girl at the time, and I can remember him going to meetings and being involved in the Ku Klux Klan marching right down past our house, and Daddy hiding all of us under the bed, just little remembrances of that. And so he was involved in that too when they were trying to establish that hospital and have staff of black doctors, black nurses, which they later did have, because the Ku Klux Klan marched and tried to frighten people, but they didn't.
It was in that environment in Tuskegee where she fell in love with Alfred Tup Holmes, the son of a well-to-do Atlanta black family who was enrolled at that institute in Tuskegee founded by Booker T. Washington. They were married in 1940 and immediately moved to Atlanta. After the outbreak of World War II, the Holmes family moved to Detroit for a few years. During that time, younger brothers Gary, Herbert, and Michael were born before the family returned south. They settled into relative tranquility of an insulated black community, but chose to resume the family tradition of challenging injustices that were considered customary at the time. Customs that Tup Holmes would not, could not, did not tolerate.
My father was buying us some watermelons. He had a car full of watermelons. And there was this jovial old white farmer. He was joking with my father and joking with everybody else who was buying watermelons at the place. And then he said something, to the effect, ain't that right, boy? He was laughing and, joking. My father quietly took those watermelons out of his car, unloaded, and drove off. He didn't say anything to the guy. The guy just sat there with his mouth wide open, and I think that old farmer probably died not knowing what he had done.
Fearless almost to a fault, Tup Holmes made it his life's avocation to stand up for dignity. That extended to his job at Lockheed Aircraft, where he organized other black employees to demand equality.
He's legendary with respect to what went on in Lockheed. They tell a story of they had separate cafeterias, and he decided that it was time to have one cafeteria, so he went into the black cafeteria. It was probably a Negro cafeteria at that time, and just started dropping dishes. He said the dishes were dirty, and they probably were, And he just started dropping dishes. And they said, we got to do something about this food or something, So ultimately they integrated the cafeteria.
It was in that spirit that the elder Holmes also took on state-sanctioned bias by challenging the white-only status of Atlanta's public golf courses. Golf was a family tradition, so joined by his father, Dr. Hamilton Mayo Holmes, brother Oliver Wendell Holmes, and real estate developer Charles Bell, this foursome successfully contested the whites-only status of Atlanta's public golf courses.
And you must also understand, by getting around the city of Atlanta, moving into the different areas, going into Druid Hills, going into Buckhead, we saw sites of public golf courses. I knew them by heart, that we were not denied the rights to play on, but they were there for the general public, white general public.
And Tuck played golf at Tuskegee as a student, and but nothing really prepared any of us for the desegregation of the golf courses there, and it hit us, it just hit us when we had to go through the experiences, you know, that we did with telephone calls, letters, and that kind of thing.
But the group persevered, unfazed by threats, even threats of economic retaliation by white business interests. In fact, these prominent members of Atlanta's black middle class used economics as the cornerstone of the lawsuit.
My father was a wealthy landowner in terms of rental properties. He paid more taxes than maybe 10 whites or 12 or 15 whites that played the courses. That was part of our suit. We proved that. There were several other companies, Wilson Realty Companies, big landowners. There was the Aiken family, big land, and none of these people, we proved that we could have access, but yet our tax dollars went to help pay for these golf courses.
Challenging the Jim Crow law, the foursome took the issue to the federal courts.
Because I was only about 6 or 7 years old when they first started this particular process, is they wanted to play on the major golf courses in Atlanta, and the major golf courses in Atlanta were closed to play by blacks. And so they, through their efforts and through the efforts of some very well-known attorneys, went through a process of integrating the golf courses in Atlanta.
I think initially this was done, I think in 1951, where they attempted to go and play at Bobby Jones and were refused, and ultimately filed suit, I believe, in 1953. And they worked his way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and November of 1954, I believe it was, no, it was 1955 that the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of Holmes versus the city of Atlanta.
I mean, we played, our first time we played was on a Christmas Eve day at North Fulton, and that was the date that we parked the car. And when we got out, that was the fun. That's where the fun began. We got out the car and got out, stopped the car, and the fella in front of us got out, pulled his cart out, and he looked back and he saw us. He grabbed his car, and I know what he was thinking. He grabbed that car and he ran like hell up to the clubhouse. Now, you know what he said when he got up there? They're coming.
You know, the interesting thing about this is this was Christmas Eve, December 24, 1955. I believe in January or either early February of 1956, they changed the state flag. Now, I'm not saying that they changed it because of that, but I'm sure that that was a little irritant on top of Brown versus Board of Education and desegregating schools and so forth, that this could have been a final straw.
And we had a few cat calls that that went by the street in cars. Niggas get off the golf course, that kind of atmosphere. But that demise was gone afterwards.
It was another ripple in the tidal wave of social change that was sweeping the country. But the price for this progress was almost too much for the rest of the family.
Oh, I guess I'm more pacifist than if it had been my wish. we would not have been involved in that golf course because it was quite a burden on the family because we were not prepared for hate letters, hate telephone calls, people, driving by the house and throwing things at the house, that we just were not prepared for it.
Displaying Isabella's quiet strength and the militance of their father, some of her children were even more militant.
Gary is a militant, if you've known about him, yes, because once they came by the house, somebody came by and they threw something up on the porch, and Gary ran that car up to the corner and took something, and I think he beat on that car, and this white guy didn't have any better sense than to call the police department and try to get them to come back and do something about it because he really beat on that car.
There were 3 or 4 of us kids. It was a hot summer night, and we were sitting on our front porch, and this is an all-black community, Vine City in Atlanta, and a car full of white kids drove by, and then one threw a brick up on the porch, and it just happened. We had our shirts off and so forth, and one happened to hit me in the side, right, and then so they took off, and okay, then that was fine. I mean, they got away, and they made a mistake. They came back to the seat of the crowd, so to speak, and there were some derogatory statements made and so forth and so on, and they attempted to get away again. Now, there was an intersection. We lived near a major intersection, and this time they got blocked in because there were some cars at the intersection that they couldn't get around, and cars were coming in. And so a friend of mine, Big Frank, and I decided we going to take off and teach him a lesson, So we got close to the car. There just happened to be a stick on the ground, so I picked up the stick and I punished the car.
At the same time, they were a family with noble aspirations. In Hamilton's case, the grand passions were academics and athletics. Typical of young men at the time, it was where he made lifelong friendships.
We all went out for the B team in football, and I was the B team quarterback, and he was a running back, and so that relationship emerged.
Holmes not only played football, but was a basketball star as well. As a football player, he eventually led Atlanta's Turner High School to a state championship. While others struggled with their studies, he sailed through high school, but remained self-effacing about his academic prowess.
We graduated from high school together. He went on to Morehouse, I went on to Clark Atlanta University. But he's one of the reasons that I think I succeeded, because I was not prepared to go to college. I had spent too much time fooling around and not being serious about my tasks or my responsibilities in high school. And he would always take time out of his schedule to help me with my homework. And that made me feel good. It made me feel secure. He never belittled me or, say, oh, you're dumb, you don't understand, or what have you. Whatever I did not understand, he took time out of his schedule.
Holmes was safe and content at Morehouse, joining the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and reveling among his peers when a confluence of events changed his life and the history of the nation. In the late 1950s, the demand for equality was heating up as civil rights groups stepped up their push for school desegregation all around the South.
We, along with our parents, felt that we certainly had a right to attend any of the state-supported universities in this area. I had always felt that I wanted to get the best education that was possible, and my feeling was that that there was a good program at the University of Georgia and that I should have the right to go there.
Then when he was tapped to go to the University of Georgia, well, it was not any wish of mine for him to leave Morehouse College to go to something, to even think about going to a college that did not want him. It never had black students that they knew of, and it was just something that was beyond my comprehension. And the things that I thought of were the things I guess most mothers would. I had 4 other children. You thought about all these threats that people had, you know, and I could envision people coming there in the middle of the night, you know, doing something, throwing a bomb at the house, doing something to harm some of my family.
So my brother and Charlene Hunter Galt, through the efforts of some other people in Atlanta, decided that they were going to challenge the efforts of the state of Georgia to exclude people of color from the state-supported schools, of which we were paying taxes to help support. And that particular process lasted, I'm not really sure, I'm not really sure of the dates, but it lasted for a good period of time, and it was a very, very trying process. One thing that I remember so much about that was that my brother, who finished valedictorian, and Charlene, who finished as the salutatorian of their high school, both were deemed not to have the mental capabilities to go to the University of Georgia.
They brought out the fact that I had been to some restaurants in the black community with my family, and this was true. And on the basis of this, they decided that I was an immoral character, and their implication was that all of the black restaurants were dives.
Once selected, the only choice left up to the pair would be which of the state's all-white colleges would be the test case.
Charlene was interested in journalism, and I was interested in pre-med. So they asked me, I told them that I did not want to go to Georgia State. Charlene said that also. So they asked me about Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech would have been better for me, but Georgia Tech would have still not been ideal. So with the Henry Grady School of Journalism over at University, which is considered to be one of the best schools in the country, I was a natural for Charlene. And with Georgia's Liberal Arts College, it was better for me. So we said, we want to go to Athens.
But getting admitted involved a tumultuous legal conflict, which was ultimately settled through the intervention of the United States Supreme Court. That struggle would pale in comparison to the harsh reality of enrolling in school amid taunts, threats, and rioting at the University of Georgia, which had remained lily white since its founding in 1785.
It was one weekend, he came home, and Hamp was upstairs, and he was coming down, and he stood at the top of the stairs. And I remember him doing his hands like this. He said, "I just can't stand it anymore." He said it just like that. And I was at the bottom of the steps, and I said, "Hamp, you don't have to." I said, "You are home, stay home." And just that quickly, it had passed with Hamp. But I remember that. I'll always remember him standing up there at the head of those steps saying, "I just can't stand it anymore." That's the only time I ever heard him, say that he was sorry he went down there.
While Charlene Hunter lived a nearly friendless existence in the midst of thousands of students on campus, for Holmes, the university experience was the equivalent of solitary confinement.
He was up there because he was recruited by some civil rights leaders here in Atlanta who said, look, we need somebody to break the ice. We need a crusader. We think that you have the qualifications, and we would like for you to be the point man on this. He accepted that challenge. He knew it was a sacrifice. He knew that he was giving up quite a bit, but he took that challenge.
It became a constant struggle as he suffered in silence, ostracized by his classmates. Conceding to fears for his safety by friends and family, Holmes found housing off campus in the black community of Athens. That safe place turned out to be the residence of Archibald Killian and his family.
If I remember correctly, Hant was eligible to stay in the dorm, but that was one of the stipulations that the university could not protect him in a dorm setting by him being a male and all the other males around him. And one of the stipulations, if I remember correctly, Charlene could stay in a dorm, but he could not because the government could not protect him.
They didn't hesitate to put themselves on the line.
I would imagine that we had about between 20 and 30 black Athenians. We had about 30 shotguns. We had about 30 cases of shotgun shells, and we were ready to whatever Malcolm X by whatever means necessary. They came out to get Hamp, and they brought the message that was when they burned the cross at Center Miles Hall, that they were going to burn a cross at our house. And I told them, if you burn a cross at my house, you won't have to ask who came. All you got to do is turn them over in the morning, pull that sheet off it, and you will know, because we are going to stand up.
Conscious decision to extend their family circle entailed more than a minor inconvenience.
So we moved the furniture from the dining room.
Yeah, that's right.
And I moved into the dining room, and we had a very nice place for Hant in my old bedroom, place to study and everything.
And I'm sure that, for everything that we do know, there are many other small things that they did on a daily basis, even just providing, maybe a hot meal for him, or, a place to go and just rest for a while and try to relieve some of the stress, I think was certainly welcome by my father at that time.
I wouldn't go on campus at night or anything like that. I never went to any basketball games 3 years that I was down there. I only went to 1 or 2 football games, and they were always day games on Saturday. But when I went, I was just one black person in this crowd of whites surrounding me.
I think particularly about the fact that he did not have friends while he was at the University of Georgia. No friends from the college. All of his friends were from the community or from Atlanta. And when I think about all the friends that I made in college, and those are my closest friends to this day, I just could not imagine how difficult that was for him to be in that setting where you do need a release. You need friends to talk to study with. And he did not have that while he was at Georgia.
Though frozen out socially at the Athens campus, Holmes continued to excel as a scholar, graduating Phi Beta Kappa in 1963 with a degree in zoology and a letter of admission to Emory University's medical school, where once again he was the first black student admitted. Things were about to heat up for the fledgling doctor the following summer during a visit to Philadelphia and a chance meeting at a sorority-sponsored party.
But one of our delegates did go downstairs, and then we heard her running down our hotel floor, calling out that every college man in the Western Hemisphere was downstairs. So we all got dressed and went downstairs, and we had been very scientifically registered by height and weight and age. Well, maybe not weight, but very little in regard to matching. And I hadn't signed up at all. So the girls in our delegation began to get paired up, and I was without a date. And so I went back to the registration table, and told the lady about my problem. And she suggested that I go into an adjacent room, and there might be some nice young man there that would be willing to escort me. And so when I went in, it was just a ballroom, but with no tables and chairs. And then young men were just lined up around the room, literally, standing there. And remembering my mother's very strict upbringing, it was not something that I could do easily to just go up and initiate a conversation. So I turned around and started to walk out.
And my father followed her. And I think another guy tried to, but my father's the one who made it out. Went to the desk, and my mom was telling the lady, oh, I'm not comfortable with this. And my father is now standing beside her, and the woman suggested they go on in together. And they spent the rest of the night talking.
At any rate, that was Monday. And we went out to dinner on Tuesday. And he said one of the things that he really liked about me was that I had a good appetite. Well, what he didn't know was I hadn't eaten since Monday. So I did eat really, really well. But we talked a lot and realized that we had a lot of things in common. And so much so that by that evening, as a matter of fact, was my 21st birthday. My mother called to wish me happy birthday and asked if I were having a good time, and I said yes, I'd fallen in love. And there was absolute silence at the other end of the line. And she said, you just got there yesterday. And I said, how long does it take?
And they were engaged 4 days later.
The following August, they began a marriage and continued a near-perfect partnership for 30 years. It was during this time that Hamilton Holmes again attacked long-standing barriers of segregation. This time it was the color barrier at Emory University Medical School. For Holmes, the choice was an extension of his personal commitment to the region.
I was always in an atmosphere where it was just expected that I would go to college. And we always felt that I should go to the best college available. But I kind of wanted to be educated in the South if I could. I grew up in the South. I love the South. I was planning on living in the South, and I absolutely thought at that time that Atlanta, even with its problems, was the best place in the world to live, and I still think it's the best place in the world to live. So I wanted something that would allow me to come back to Atlanta and be known and be able to move around in circles and practice.
And Holmes, practicing the biblical tenet of each one reach one and each one teach one, forged the way for other African Americans to enroll in the graduate schools there, starting with longtime friend Marvin Arrington, who had enrolled at Howard University's law school.
He said, why don't you transfer to Emory Law School? And I said, man, they're not going to let me in no law school at Emory. He said, well, I'm in med school. And so that summer when I came home, I went out to Emory just to look around and to do some reading in the law library. And the dean of the law school walked up to me, Ben Johnson, asked me who I was, and I thought he, quite frankly, was getting ready to run me off. But he was inquiring. I told him I was just completed my freshman year at the Howard Law School. And he asked me if I'd be interested in going to Emory Law School. And I said, Dean, are you serious about that? He said, yeah. And so he invited me into his office and we chatted.
Arrington went on to earn a law degree, and Holmes finished medical school in 1967. At that point, his life took a more predictable path as he served in the Army, returned home to start his practice, and began a family with his beloved Maryland. It was a routine that he savored on a daily basis, a priority for a man constantly faced with critical choices.
Dr. Holmes was the consummate family man. He loved Marilyn I don't know if it's possible for a man to love a woman more than that. I used to always look at that and go, man, that's how it's supposed to be.
Every morning, once I started kindergarten, he made a hot breakfast, he packed my lunch, and he took me to the bus stop. And that was time that we could talk about what was going on in my life. And I think that was a consistent time for him when he knew that he could spend time with both me and my brother, because he never knew what the day or night was going to bring, if he was going to be on call or, you know, away all night. But every morning he was there, and I'm glad we had that time. I wouldn't necessarily say that I was a daddy's girl, but I do think I was the apple of his eye.
A very strong supporter. I mean, he couldn't have been a stronger family person. He worked very hard in his profession, but when he was off, he was off. And we took vacations with our children. He thought family was extremely important, but we also nurtured our relationship.
He could have opted for the comfortable middle-class life his education and training provided for. However, the Holmes family worth ethic propelled him into a teaching position at Emory's Medical School.
As Hamp completed that effort at the University of Georgia, he was the first African-American student at Emory University School of Medicine, and entered the Emory Clinic quite early, did a highly commendable job at every site. Hamp E. was a very pleasant person with an easy, friendly, warm smile, an excellent brain, and worked hard. He was vigorous. He was competitive.
But he was a complete person. He was physically capable, he was mentally capable, and he was socially capable. He did something unusual when he was on staff at Emory under me. He said, "Tom, you do a lot of spines, and I would like to get some more training in spine."
So once again, he chose to be a trailblazer, this time learning a whole new medical specialty, spinal care. By the mid-1980s, that willingness to be innovative propelled Holmes to the top of his profession and into upper management at Atlanta's Grady Hospital, a teaching facility. In the next few years, Holmes' professional recognition reached its zenith. Such success, however, came with a heavy price.
We were partners at Crawford Long Hospital. And the time when I was there, I think there may have been, maybe this was early 90s, 1991, may have been 3 surgeons of color in the entire Emory Clinic. So even though we all did well and thrived there, there was always pressure to do well, pressure to not embarrass anyone, the pressure to make everyone proud.
Well, I don't think Hamp ever met a stranger. He had the ability to talk to anybody and sometimes talk into midnight. One of the problems that we had when he was on my staff at Emory, and we were partners at Emory in orthopedics, was that he'd sometimes go around and talk to his patients for hours, just of being friends. He had a drive that was unbelievable.
Gradually, Holmes developed a new perspective about his experiences at the University of Georgia, sparked by his own children.
One thing that I always admired, though, was that when I was looking at colleges, my father never said a negative word about UGA. And that was something that, when I look back on it now, he could have easily done that. You know, said, well, you know, my experience there was not great. You know, I don't think you should go there either.
In time, the painful memories yielded to a love of the institution and their rabid devotion to its football team.
You know, Hamp was humble, you know, and every time he would go back for something where they honored him, he'd get emotional. You know, he had a bad feeling for the University of Georgia, you know, and then as the time wore on, he forgave everybody, you know, and he went back and gave, you know, the University of Georgia its best, and I'm sure he still had some problems when he went back in terms of some folk, but you know, he had sense of humor and pleasure and loved some bulldog football.
I remember seeing pictures of my father and Charlene walking through the arch, walking in that area. And then when I first walked through the arch myself, I remember, their picture in my mind when they were still struggling to try to, gain admittance to the school, first of all, and then pictures of them later, walking through the arch again. It felt good. So I was proud to be able to do that, and thinking that my father had helped to lay the groundwork for that.
I remember Hamp went up to visit the University of Georgia several years ago, and he was somebody that was showing him around, and he saw some black kids playing basketball on the campus, and somebody introduced Hamp to them, and they said, "Hey, this is Hamilton Holmes." And they just kind of looked at him, and yeah, okay, who is he? He just, I mean, as if they didn't know. I mean, not that everybody is supposed to worship Hamp anything, but it just seems like that you would at least say, "Hey, man, yeah, you the guy who took the heat for us. We up here, we can play basketball openly here on campus and go to school here because, of the sacrifices which you made."
Personal sacrifices, which often went unheralded, were the hallmark of his life.
He was a caring person. He took care of all of us children. He rounded us up, made sure we pretty much behaved when necessary. And he did feel that he had to perform and achieve up to other people's expectations. I think that helped kill him sooner.
In the fall of 1995, Holmes underwent a quadruple coronary bypass operation and seemed to be on the road to recovery. But the years of hard work and sacrifice took their toll. He died on October 26. He was only 54 years old.
Dr. Holmes had integrity. He had a quiet strength. And I think his greatest gift was his humility. As long as I knew him, he never talked about being the first African American in the University of Georgia, integrating that system, integrating Emory, being the first in anything. That would never come up in a conversation. In a way, and not to take this out of context, but it was just almost like Jesus in a sense that when a miracle was performed, he would oftentimes say, "Don't tell anybody about this."
His legacy, ironically, became the catalyst for a conciliatory move by the university that once spurned him. In 2001, Holmes and Hunter were honored when the school renamed its academic headquarters after them.
It truly is an academic honor. I think, for my father and Charlene also having gone and graduated and done well and being successful today, I think shows that, those were two outstanding people that can come and do well. The other thing that's sort of touching for me with the naming of the building is that I've actually been in that building myself several times for different reasons, for meetings that were held there. That's a place where you go to get your transcripts or talk to some other folks regarding academic issues. So having been in that building myself when I was a student, when it was under a different name, and then now today being named for my father, holds some extra significance as well.
University of Georgia has been very generous in extending a lot of time and attention and honors, but when a building bears your name, I think that that just speaks volumes.
However, the enduring legacy of Hamilton Holmes extends beyond a nameplate on one building in Athens, Georgia, or a professional achievement in the local medical community.
Maybe Dr. Holmes wasn't, the smartest African American for that job. Maybe he wasn't. Jackie Robinson wasn't the best African American baseball player, talent-wise, to integrate baseball. But Dr. Holmes was the right man, as Jackie Robinson was the right man.
A man whose perseverance fostered change in Georgia. 4 decades after his admission, black students on campus are no longer a novelty, and in his hometown, a street was renamed in his honor.
And let me tell you about the highway, because the highway is so important, because my mother lives a couple of blocks from Hamilton E. Holmes Drive. It's former Hightower Road. Frederick Douglass High School is on Hamilton E. Holmes Drive. The cemetery where he, my father, uncle, and grandfather are buried is 1 block away from Hamilton E. Holmes Drive.
It's very gratifying. I mean, every time I see the street sign or the sign over the MARTA station now, it's very, I get a little verklempt, as some people say in New York. I am proud. I am proud to see it.
I mean, I don't want to just look as if it's just the Holmes family. There were hundreds of people all over the South for the last 100 or 200 years who have made sacrifices to pave the way for the successes which we have. And I just don't think that it is really appreciated.
And I think that my grandfather, my father, my uncle, and in their efforts to open up public accommodations, and my brother's efforts to open up public education, I think that is a tremendous legacy for generations of my family and hopefully other families to see that, these just are some people that were in the boys club, they were at the Y, they were football players, they were just regular people, but they decided that they were going to try and be the best that they can. And if there's something that's blocking your way, you find a way to get around it.
Even as we meet people at various events, they will make that comment. I was able to go to Georgia because of your dad. And that is good to know that people are able to go on and better themselves and have a better life because of something that my father did. And it was just a small step, but it has just been magnified because of all the other people that have been touched.
As I look back on it now, it wasn't as bad as it seemed at the time. And I think certainly that if I had to, do that over again, that I wouldn't hesitate.